Hello everybody and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for over 12 years now. I currently sit within our knowledge and practice part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the whole impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 members working worldwide, right across the property life cycle, across land, residential, commercial, infrastructure and alternative assets, there's obviously a huge impact as we work through land, planning development, construction, finance, brokerage, valuation, financing, building operation, building surveying, asset management, a huge range of opportunities where data and tech is having a profound effect on the sector. And I'm really happy to have David and Chris join me from InView Assets. So morning, both of you.
Morning.
Morning.
Great to have you on the call, and I always like to start with a kind of a bit of a sort of human backstory before we get into the bits and bytes. So perhaps starting with you, David, could you tell us a bit about yourself and InView Assets and the journey that you've taken to get here?
Morning, everyone. Yes, I suppose I would regard myself as an academic geographer by background and by training. I was a school teacher a very, very long time ago, but I have a particular interest in field work and also GIS, Geographical Information Systems. I've worked for a number of organisations doing different training roles, and I've even historically set A-level and GCSE geography exam papers as well. So I suppose quite a different background to many of the people who might be on these sorts of calls. Several years ago, I got an interest in drone technology, and I then set up a small company, as it was then, Southwest Aerial Surveys. And since then, we've sort of transformed the business into something which is a prop tech business, I think, really, which has become InView, and we've become much more specialised in what our offer is, looking very much more around property and assets and trying to help people to understand how to manage those better. And I suppose our philosophy of this is using that data, particularly quantitative data, to give people more information for, I suppose, less outlay and less resource as well. So that's my story.
So, Chris, moving to you, what's your sort of backstory and relationship with the InView asset journey?
Well, thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. I've become involved in InView in the last sort of year to 18 months. As Dave said, he originally had a small business and he asked me to come in and look at it. My background is I've owned and run and been a consultant in multiple businesses and sectors, but I guess a common thread and theme throughout my years involved in business as an entrepreneur and an owner has been property. I've either owned property or managed property, or I've been buying and selling property. And I'd say in most sectors and walks of life, the built environment is a part of where we exist for 8 hours a day, sometimes as a minimum. It can be a lot more depending where you're working. So having looked at David's business, I just saw great potential in what he was offering, but it just needed to be more focused to certain sectors and focused in its delivery, in its applications and outcomes. And so we've rebranded the whole company, and I think it's safe to say in the last 6 months, we're getting a lot of traction in the market. There's a lot of excitement, and I think as we'll broaden out into this conversation, technology as an enabler in property asset management is a key way forward for owners and managers to tailor their budgets effectively so that they can actually manage in a sustainable way and in a profitable way and in a safe way their asset portfolio. So I just see this as an exciting area which I'm very invested in now, and pleased to be working with Dave and InView Assets.
So staying with you, Chris, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that kind of that backstory of constant involvement in the property sector. From your perspective, what do you see as the challenges that faces the industry now, but also perhaps in the future? Because it's obviously a shifting environment post-pandemic, and with as you alluded to, issues around ESG. What do you see as these initial challenges now, and also what perhaps the next 5-10 years might challenge the sector with?
Well, I often think to look forward, you have to look back, which I know sometimes people find curious, but historically, if we look at traditionally and typically, I mean, this isn't the case for all asset owners and asset managers, but I think it's safe to say there's been a lack of investment generally, historically, and understanding of the owner's asset and the manager's asset. And I think we see that playing out particularly today as a topical theme is with the RICS situation, whereby local authorities, for whatever reason, have not invested in sufficient inspection and reporting and monitoring of the assets that they own. And there's a clue in the term of assets, Andrew, where there's a value in that. And my view has always been that you look after your assets and you nurture them and you take care of them. I suppose the overriding theme is prevention rather than cure. And I think historically, a lot of asset owners have not prioritized their maintenance, their PPM, and as a consequence, it comes home to roost, and it can be very expensive to do the fix after the event rather than preventing it at the time. So looking forward, as in so many different walks of life, technology, it's a double-edged sword, I suppose, but I see it as a product of good and a product, a source of solutions going forward. And I suppose I was thinking about this the other day, is a very popular term in the noughties and so the last 15, 20 years has been the disruptors. And I know when I initially got involved with InView Assets we were talking about, are we a disrupting company? And I'd rather take a different tack. And this is the way I sort of look to the future in terms of my glass being half full, so to speak, that we're enablers. And what I want to enable is property owners and managers to actually use property technology to improve the value and the safety of their assets so that they're getting a better return in their ROI, so that people who are in that built environment have a safer and more valued time within that work environment. So tech, data, digital data in many aspects of property management, I am absolutely convinced is the way forward. Then we would overarch into the area of AI, which is, I'm sure everyone's talking about it at home, down the pub, and we could go down the rabbit hole of that, I suppose. Yeah. And I think maybe that's for another day, but AI has a place within this framework. Is it the silver bullet solution? Absolutely not in my mind. It is a valuable tool. And again, with what we're doing at InView Assets, we are a valuable tool in the toolbox. We are not a one-stop solution. So to the future, I think the adoption of property technology and for owners and managers to embrace that, I think is absolutely key. And enablers like ourselves in discussion with property, big portfolio owners and academics is to drive forward a user-friendly service through PropTech that gives the solutions that the owners and the managers are after.
Thanks, Chris. So back to you, David, and perhaps down to some of the kind of nuts and bolts or bits and bytes about what you're doing. When you're creating these, these external 3D twins of buildings, how do you actually do that? And then what are the outcomes? Because obviously, technology is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. So can you talk us through the kind of methodology and actually what people get when they get these external 3D twins that you're building?
Yes, I will do it. And it's probably a good opportunity, if I can, just to share a screen with you.
Yeah, surely.
At this moment to have a kind of conversation around it. So I think people think traditionally of drones as buzzing things in the sky where there's a camera attached to them and they take lots of little pictures. They do that, but if you know how to use the drone in I suppose a technological solution approach, then they can be really very, very clever. And we use basically a process called photogrammetry to create 3D models. And it's simply really a piece of software that stitches together photographs which are sort of taken in a systematic, a transect format with a lot of overlap on them, to be able to produce points of reference which can be measured, and those can be measured in 3 dimensions. We can then from that actually create as well a 3-dimensional skinned model from those photographs. And I've got on the screen in front of you that this is from a Russell Group university, and they're interested in inspecting these concrete fins which run up the side of a large 20-meter high building. And we've basically taken done a little pilot survey for them where we can look at those fins. And this is a model that's been created, and you can move up and down on the model and position it exactly where you'd want. The reason you've got holes in it here is because this is a highly reflective surface, and that's one of the challenges with photogrammetry, as I'm sure listeners will know. But we can actually measure aspects of this, and we can inspect as well. So we can kind of click on the photograph and zoom in. And the key thing, I suppose, of this technology is that with the right capture process, you can create a very high precision digital reality twin, which removes the need in some circumstances to be abseiling off the side of a tall building to go and take photographs of it. I think one of the things that we've learned through our business journey is there really is a secret sauce to doing this, that you need to understand a lot about photography in terms of light, focal length, aperture, all of those sorts of things to get a high quality capture. You know, we're still learning about this, and different buildings present different challenges. But it's not just a case of sending a drone up there and you know, taking a few photographs and putting it into the software. It needs to be well thought out in order to produce a high quality model. And certainly when we work with clients, we give them different options around the resolution. Because sometimes you don't need resolution which is as high as this in order to be able to make decisions around cracked tiles, or where you have you know, valleys that are in need of repair or whatever. So it's an ongoing conversation with customers and with clients to be able to match expectations.
And from a kind of planned preventative maintenance perspective, I mean, I think that you alluded to that earlier, Chris. How can you use these external twins to kind of manage that ongoing process? Because I know that it's the old cliche about painting the Forth Road Bridge, and I think they've changed the paint now. They don't need to start again as soon as they finish, but it is this ongoing thing, isn't it, of actually, you can't just take a photograph of a building and think, right, well, that's done, we'll use that as the basis for the next 5 or 10 years worth of PPM, can you?
No, that's right. And I know Chris said earlier, didn't he, that we're just part of the solution here. We're not the one-stop shop for all of the decisions that you may be making on how to manage your building. But I think we provide, I go back to that word we've used, all of us I think have used really, we provide quantitative data around evidence-based decisions. And so that if you look at the digital twin and you mark up a defect on it, it has a position, it has a lat and a long, and it has a height. And that means that anyone who might be going to do some remedial work can do the work in the correct place, as opposed to perhaps a traditional way of doing it where it might be marked up on a photograph. And with a lot of these larger buildings we work on, this building here, for instance, has about 100 concrete fins on it. You know, there's plenty of potential for getting the wrong fin at the wrong height in order to do some remedial work. So it allows you to sort of understand in much more detail, I think, about the building fabric. You obviously can't touch the building fabric, you can't hammer it, and we accept that. But if you think about the use case for this, then I would guess this is a precursor to a piece of work that you might do when you actually do decide to abseil off, or to get a cherry picker up, so that you don't have to do the whole building or the whole asset. You can concentrate your resources on areas where you know it's likely to have a problem because you've seen it from some images which are high resolution and close up. So it's a useful tool in that aspect. I mean, I think the other thing which is very, very important about this technology, and it's the way that we're all used to working now, is that we essentially you know, want people to be able to see what those problems or those defects are on a very straightforward platform, a platform which is cloud-based, which doesn't require any specialist knowledge of BIM or CAD in order to be able to access the information which is there. And that means that sort of zero-touch approach across different stakeholders or agencies or players or whatever you want to call them, that surely is a better use of resources than people perhaps physically visiting the building as well. So that will allow the sort of PPM budget to go in multiple directions as well. So I think there's a lot of benefits with this, as long as it's all people understand how it should be applied, and how you can potentially achieve, I would argue, better sustainability as well in terms of management of assets.
Indeed. Chris, moving to you, I'm conscious that on the face of it, that this feels like obviously an approach that would benefit every kind of asset owner, every kind of organization. From your experience to date, I mean, are there particular kinds of stakeholders within the kind of property sector that particularly benefit from this kind of more technology-driven approach?
Well, picking up on a theme that David was talking about there, Andrew, I think there are sort of two drivers behind this, and it's one of the key areas that I think I brought to the table within our business, but I know for all our clients, it is ultimately their number one concern. It's cost, it's money. And I don't know if you know the movie with Tom Cruise in Jerry Maguire, but there's a famous line quoted in that: "Show me the money." And whenever I've come across CFOs, financial directors, whatever acronyms you want to give them, they can be all these great ideas within a business, but when it gets to that table of the FD, it all comes down to pounds and pennies and show me the money. And so in terms of organizations that would benefit from this, you rightly say, you could argue pretty much any property, but on a matter of scale, then you're looking at organizations, businesses who have large asset portfolios. And then I would add into the mix there organizations that have the capacity and the will to understand that new technology can be beneficial, that change is something that they are open-minded to. So a particular area, for instance, where we are very strong in is with universities across the UK. Because quite often within those establishments and the teams of the asset management within those universities, be it the universities themselves or independent companies that operate out of universities that provide student accommodation, they will have surveyors within their teams, they will have financial people within their teams, they will have technical people within their teams. And I would say, as a rule of thumb, sometimes when we talk to admin people within organizations or even surveyors, they either don't understand what we're trying to deliver or they're resistant to change. But quite often when we get in front of a technical person, what I have witnessed in the year that I've been involved in our business is what I call a light bulb moment. You're talking to a table of people who are your clients, and you'll see someone at the table, they'll suddenly, the light switches on, they go, wow, this has got to be the way forward. So the organizations we are trying to deal with, who are people who have that ability to understand the value of the technology in terms of its quantitative and qualitative delivery, but equally we are also attracting the CFO because they're realizing that their budget for PPM or sustainability can go a lot further. So if I just give you an example, and I'm not going to mention the client's name here for confidentiality reasons, but David and I were on a call yesterday to a well-known university, let's say in the UK, who were looking at a PPM project on a grade 1 listed building, and the inspection and report quote was initially around £500,000. Within 6 months, that had gone up to £3.6 million just for inspection report. This was not for any remedial work. And as the client was saying, this sort of level of budget increase is not sustainable. They could not take it, they could not accept this. Looking at how we would be doing this and using technology, and I'd like to stress here, Andrew, this isn't just our technology. This is a multiple range of technologies within the built environment sector. When we were talking of the potential savings that could be made for a like-for-like inspection report that we were able to offer with the support of qualified surveyors, or in some cases it might be qualified structural engineers, would be a fraction of the cost of what they were looking at. So in terms of their budget, which is obviously, this was just one building, the significant scale of savings that they could have within that are, well, quite unbelievable. So you need to be looking at housing associations, universities, local authorities, government. Within that, there's obviously the NHS, there's Defence, MOD, Justice Department, Education. We all know about RICS at the moment and the savings that could be applied, because the costs are looking prohibitive in some cases. I don't know where they're going to find the money, but these are areas where we can assist. We are in conversation with the Department for Education at the moment to do with the RICS situation, just offering a part of the solution. As we said earlier on, we're not a one-stop shop. And again, historic and listed buildings. So there is a broad church, but for me, the organisations who will be attracted are the ones who are open-minded and have a significant amount of savings to make, because that's where we're hitting the sweet spot.
Indeed, Chris. And I suppose to turn that question slightly around, I mean, you've mentioned barriers of having to effectively sell into multiple teams sitting around a table, and obviously the key issue of showing a kind of return on investment. But I mean, are there some other challenges you find that are stopping organizations simply moving away from a traditional approach to using, as you say, a mix of technologies, because there is no single silver bullet, is there?
No, absolutely, there isn't. I suppose picking up on the themes that I've touched on there already, inertia in many walks of life is not just, let's not try and hang this just on surveyors and structural engineers and CFOs. Inertia and change is largely down to communication. It's down to access. However, we often find, as I've already said, that getting people on board until somebody in that team has the light bulb moment. So I call them champions, is what I call them, Andrew. If we can find within an organisation somebody to champion our cause, then we find the path to success, not just for ourselves, but ultimately for the clients. Yes, we're in business, but we're only going to be successful in business if we deliver success for the client and it's tangible for them. So that is very much a case of finding our champion. I suppose an area which is opening up more for us, which is as opposed to a bigger challenge, this is a slightly easier path, is that we are engaged with, again, 2 universities on their sustainability net zero programs, one for 2030, one for 2035. I guess like the government, the 2030 university will change it to 2035 because everything's being pushed out a little bit further. But nevertheless, these are large-scale projects with a phenomenal amount of capital expenditure potential. So it's understandable, in my mind, if I was sitting on the other side of the table, that I would be very cautious if I'm being presented with a property tech solution that purports to save significant money and deliver better value all at the same time. I suppose it goes along the line, if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And I'm not trying to cut my feet from underneath myself here, Andrew, but what I'm saying is I understand why organizations who are ultimately are protecting their ROI and their shareholders and their staff, if they're having something projected to them which is sounding too good to be true, they rightly need to investigate that and they need to check that out. So a way we have around that is we do pilot projects. And what we like to do is we'd like to try to compare apples with apples. So we will literally say to a potential client, okay, we've shown you what it does. We understand you may have doubts about it. You may not understand completely what we're doing. And the best way for me to see to get over that is if we go onto their estate and we do a snapshot pilot of, okay, you would have used scaffolding here or ropes or a cherry picker, and it would have taken this amount of time. We will actually physically do this for you. And then you can just sit the two side and it just reveals automatically with their own assets so they can feel it. Then the light bulb goes on as well, even for the CFO at that point, who are normally the most curmudgeonly and resistant to any change whatsoever. At that point, then they can often see the benefits of this tech, and I would argue again more broadly in tech in general. So for me, the secret of getting over that inertia barrier is doing a like-for-like pilot scheme to actually show them with their own asset value that they can get.
Chris, can I just come in just for 2 seconds on that question as well? Because for me, I think another reason why there is inertia around technology is that there's skepticism or mistrust of it, or a lack of understanding around what the technology can actually offer. And again, that's part of the conversation. I mean, we've been talking to colleagues who have RICS associations, and some of the reports that RICS have written have directly identified this around within the profession. And it's not just within the profession we're talking about today, it's within organizations in general. There is this, as I said before, this skepticism around change. And if I do jump to another solution, is this going to cost me a lot more money or something, or is it going to create problems in the long run? So I think those are all valid as well.
Indeed. And staying with you, David, actually, and you've kind of referenced this point to some extent earlier, but I'm interested because there's always this sort of nervousness in any sector when you get a kind of wave of technology as we're currently seeing, that it's going to lead to ultimately people not having the same job roles and a reduction in workload. But how do you see this kind of approach that you're using augmenting or potentially replacing elements of the traditional on-site survey?
Well, I think we've sort of covered, haven't we, Andrew, some of this already. But I guess I'll reiterate the fact that the technology is one of the tools that can be used to assess the condition of a building, or to gain more quantitative information around the condition of certain elements of a building, particularly those areas which are hard to reach. And I think it comes back to this whole idea around sort of working more smartly and more efficiently given the resources that you've got. Because I think that if I was, a surveyor, building surveyor, or even an engineering surveyor, then my time is much more valuable when I'm actually making decisions around perhaps evidence which is more complex and more challenging, which may have been identified by someone else or another agency. I mean, we've talked to many surveyors about this, and they always say that we've got the best job because we're not actually, we're not making any decisions around how bad it is. We're just showing them the pictures, and then they have to go and make a decision around that, which is great. So I kind of, our zero touch approach, I think, is not in any way intending to replace the traditional on-site survey. It's adding value to it and augmenting, I suppose, that approach. So I think that's really important.
Can I just add to that as well, just to build on that a little bit, Dave? And I feel guilty about this sometimes, if I'm honest, Andrew. As you know, my background is business, and I'm aware, as I've already made very clear, that organisations often just look at saving money. But the reality is, as well, and I think this is becoming more to the fore, and rightly so, and it is something that we as a company are genuinely advocating, is this is a safety issue as well. It's reducing the need to work at height. And I think that is often overlooked in a variety of scenarios. So the zero touch approach it's zero touch in terms of through the cloud-based platform. You can view this anytime, any place, anywhere. When we've uploaded it onto your account as a client, yes, you can look at that. But what it's doing is it's reducing the risk, reducing putting people at risk, contractors, staff, from working at height and going up buildings. I mean, for example, we were working on one university campus in the summer, and a couple of maintenance guys who worked at university got chatting to me, and as always, because they're very interested when they see a drone flying around, everyone goes, "Oh, what are you doing?" And so I explained to these guys, and they just said, "Great." So I said, "Well, why? What's your angle on this?" And he said, they both said, "Well, we're the guys that normally go up on the roof. So what you're doing means we don't have to go up on the roof anymore." Now, it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, I accept, but the point was there. These were the actual two blokes, and there's over 200 buildings on this campus who, obviously within the health and safety confines of the organisation. Now, I'm not saying the organisation is putting them at risk whatsoever, but nevertheless, working at height has its inherent dangers and risks. And this is something, again, in terms of replacing traditional on-site surveys, we're not replacing it, but we are improving safety, we are reducing costs, and ultimately we're allowing access to more agencies and stakeholders from a safer place with more detail. So that's where I think we see it stepping in, but I think safety as well is a key issue here.
Yeah, as you say, Chris, that there is this whole issue here of, to some extent, de-risking operations and reducing that liability of people having to go up into potentially dangerous situations, in far fewer occasions. I mean, staying with you, Chris, once again, it's a topic that's kind of been mentioned in passing on this discussion so far, but clearly it's a huge issue for the property sector, and it's a huge strategic piece for us here at RICS around the whole ESG agenda. And how do you see technology helping these large asset owners address that? Because you've talked about the huge costs that they're potentially faced with in terms of inspection, let alone any kind of remediation. But if they then look at the kind of impact of retrofit and the kind of issues around ESG and energy reduction, it's an eye-watering agenda for them in many respects, isn't it?
Absolutely, Andrew. It is eye-watering. I think it would fill the capacity of most big brains, let alone small brains like mine. So I am pleased to say that ESG is becoming more of a mainstream agenda with organisations. It's something that historically I've been passionate about in various businesses I've worked in, that environmentalism and governance and social responsibility has been at the core of a lot of what I've done historically. So where does this add value, and where can it simplify the understanding? Well, if we look at environmental side, first of all, energy efficiency. We are able through our technology to do thermal surveys of the thermal envelope, so we can assist asset owners understand where thermal leakage is, where water ingress will be in buildings. As we all know, water, probably above and beyond heat, is the primary invader of any building envelope. We can also assist with surveys for potential implementation of renewable assets, particularly solar. Also, an area that we're talking about with one client, which I have to say had not struck us at first, but now it's quite obvious, is about climate change and climate threat. And as we're facing this week, I think Storm Karen, is it coming in tomorrow?
Yeah, Karen,
yeah. Obviously, average rainfall is increasing significantly and more erratically. So in terms of roof space and understanding your roof and water capture and the risk of flooding and actually moving water off your asset, a lot of asset owners do not understand their roofs because they don't get up there often enough, or even if they do, they can't get to see the whole of their roof because of valleys and gullies and just various points that are impossible to get to. So understanding your thermal envelope, understanding your roof in terms of its capacity to discharge water, are two key environmental aspects. In terms of social, we've already touched on safety, safety for staff, safety for contractors, safety for all stakeholders. We are also within the social side very strong within our product, as a lot of technology companies are, on privacy and data security. So the hosting platform for the data that we are collating, it has an ISO 27701, which is the highest grade of international standard for data security. And then in terms of good governance, which is something I feel quite strongly about in a wider context, is that board decisions and corporate governance all too often, in my view, just take the view of the shareholder. Through what we're delivering, we are allowing decision makers to make more informed, evidence-based decisions to protect their assets. And in protecting their assets, they protect their staff, they protect visitors to their site. They are ultimately, by looking after their asset, also assisting their shareholders. But I guess it's coming at it from a slightly different direction. Instead of, as we know, some asset owners like to squeeze the asset, as they say. They will spend very little money on maintenance and run it into the ground. That is not an area that we're going to, or most technology companies are going to have joy in. But in terms of good governance of your building and the impact it has on the wider environment around your asset, staff in particular, and in terms of its carbon zero impact or reaching toward that, there are many benefits that not just our technology. And again, I'd like to stress, Andrew, this is obviously we're here talking today as InView Assets, but technology is a broader church. If it is the right technology and it's delivering what it says on the tin, key, then there are multiple ESG benefits, and I think they're easily accessible and easily understandable for our audience.
Can I just show an example just on screen very quickly, if that's all right? Chris was talking about thermal envelope, and I think this is quite interesting. So this is a recent shot that we've done of a tower block that we're doing down in the southwest, and you can see that it's a thermal picture side by side with a normal picture. And you can actually see really clearly the dark patches on there, which I think to me indicate patches of water. They're colder spots, which is you know, penetrating the render. So it looks like you've got some cracking underneath some of the windowsills. And you've also got the hot spots as well, where there are, you know, patches of warmth that are coming through as well. You know, this is all part of the evidence base, isn't it? That helps you understand more about your asset, and you can then, you know, very quickly make a decision around, do I need to do something about this? And as I said before, I think the technology is just providing you with lots more insights very quickly, and let's be honest, pretty cheaply, in terms of how the fabric of your building is actually performing.
And I'd just like to, a final point on this as well, Andrew, is so it isn't just all about business per se. Through David's historical work as being a teacher and he's a fellow at the Royal Geographical Society as well. His contacts into the academic community are very good, and we're finding on a more theoretical, just an open discussion level, is that we are engaging now with certainly 2 universities and just discussing in a broader context what property technology can do to deliver, to add value. Now you can argue what add value is. Is it add value? Is it just fiscal, or is it outcome, or is it both? But these are very live debates, as you're very well aware at the RICS, that are going on. And when, yes, we are a company, yes, we are looking to make money at the end of the day, Having said that, though, we are very engaged with the academic aspect to this, because we want to explore, genuinely want to explore through our product how we can bring advantages, and I would like to say deliver more than we say we're going to, and that we keep moving forward and developing.
Indeed. David, just a final question to you, if I may. And not necessarily as ever mentioning a specific client, but it'd be great to sort of bring it alive as a final kind of couple of minutes around perhaps a story about a client where they've used technology and there's been a, as ever, that immediate kind of ROI savings, because it is such a large barrier, I think, this perception that technology is not going to deliver ROI.
Yeah, so this is an example of a school for a client where we've done our usual kind of capture service. It took the drone pilot about 8,000 or 9,000 square meters of roof, mostly flat roof, and there's also some pitched roof as well outside of the picture. And the client is in dispute with the roofing contractor around the quality of the flat roof that's been put onto it. It took us round about 2 hours to capture the data with a drone, and then probably sort of half a day of processing that data to produce the model, something like that. So a relatively low cost solution in comparison with perhaps a surveyor going out. And I think what I want to emphasize here is that we're able to provide complete coverage of this asset in terms of its roof, whereas potentially a surveyor, they would have to make decisions perhaps on the day around which areas of the roof that they may have to look at in more detail than we're able to provide. Sorry, that they're able to provide. I think the other added dimension of this is you can see on the platform we use is that all the defects are marked up and they're all hyperlinked into the model, and they're shown by these little pins or icons that you'll be familiar with from things like Google Earth as well. But we're also able to show deflection as well. So where you have roof spans where you've got a flat surface, you might be looking for where there are areas of which are effectively raised or reduced in height away from that plane. We're able to show those to within millimeters of levels of precision. And again, that would be something that would be very, very difficult, I suspect, I'm not a surveyor, but very difficult to allow you to do that on site. And therefore, I think we bring a little bit of value to the table in terms of that. But I think the key thing, going back to, why did the client want us to do this? Well, they want to have a record, an evidence base, a snapshot in time, which is a complete coverage of what this asset looks like, what its defects are. And therefore, if they're going to take more action, they know where their priorities are. But they also, the big advantage I think that we're trying to talk about here is that all of these markups have been done from the safety of someone's desk. They're not standing on the roof to do it, and they can be done at whatever time that you want to do them. So there isn't a sort of a time pressure to do them. So these have actually been done. There's more than 400 markups on this roof of defects. These have been done over the course of weeks, and of course it's very easy to share this model with other stakeholders, as we said before. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of savings, we generally reckon that the cost savings compared to a traditional survey method are of the order of 60 to 80%. That's our ballpark figures in terms of that.
Indeed. No, fascinating, and it's really it reminds me, actually, I was at one of our conferences yesterday, and a surveyor was going through the new retrofit standard we had released recently, which actually ironically is for residential rather than commercial or kind of public buildings like that. But it was really a wake-up call, as a reminder that there's no point in retrofitting or kind of looking at that kind of piece around the ESG agenda for existing assets until you fix the defects. If you have defects in the fabric, there's no point in putting heat pumps in and all PV. You've got to fix the defects first. So it's really important that we get these defects fixed in buildings before we then address the really important net zero piece. Well, David, Chris, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for your insight. And for today, thanks again, but look forward to catching up again in the future.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you.
Pleasure.